You're listening to
Catholic Sprouts,
the daily podcast for Catholic kids that strives to plant seeds of faith. Hey there, Sprouts. Today is Tuesday, March 26, 2019. This week on the Catholic Sprouts podcast, we are talking about Jesus Christ as we journey through Lent. And this week, we are looking at his miracles. Yesterday, we started with his first miracle, which was performed at the wedding feast at Cana at the request of his mother. Today, we are moving on to his healing miracles. We're going to be talking about his healing miracles both today and tomorrow. Now, in the Gospels, there are lots and lots of examples of when Jesus healed someone that was hurt or ill or disabled. There are lots of these examples, but we today are going to look at one particular example. And through this example, we are going to see how Jesus not only sees our physical wounds and helps us with our physical suffering, but he also sees our spiritual wounds and how having some spiritual healing is as important to Jesus, if not more important. So the story we are going to look at is the healing of two blind men. This is a story taken from the Gospel of Matthew, and here are the verses that tell us of this healing. As they were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed him. There were two blind men sitting by the roadside. When they heard that Jesus was passing by, they shouted, "Lord, have mercy on us, Son of David." The crowd sternly ordered them to be quiet, but they shouted even more loudly, "Have mercy on us, Lord, Son of David." Jesus stood still and called to them, saying, "What do you want me to do?" They said to him, "Lord, let our eyes be opened." Moved with compassion, Jesus touched their eyes. Immediately they regained their sight and followed him. The Gospel of the Lord. Now, what's interesting about this story, well, there's a couple of interesting things. Number one, I want you to note how the crowd responded to these blind men begging for Jesus' help. They encouraged these men to be quiet, and they thought Jesus would simply walk by and ignore them. They were probably in ragged clothing, beggars, and at the time, people thought that if you suffered from something like blindness, it was due to sin, possibly the sin of your parents, maybe your sin, but sort of that you got what you deserved. So they thought that these men were below the notice of Jesus Christ. Of course, they weren't. I also want you to notice how the men called out to Jesus. They called him the Son of David. Now, through the Old Testament, we know that it was prophesied that one of Jesse's tree, Jesse is, of course, the father of David, that a person in that lineage would be the Messiah, would save the Jewish people, would reunite and reestablish the relationship with God that was lost in the Garden of Eden. So by calling him the Son of David, they are demonstrating their belief in him as the Messiah. And believing in Jesus, having faith in him, is critical to every healing we see in the gospel. Next, after Jesus heals these men and restores their sight, what happens? He, of course, continues on his way. He's part of a big crowd. They're headed somewhere else. But what do these men do? They now have sight. They could stand up. They no longer have to be beggars. They're no longer outcasts. Potentially, they could go back to their families or get good jobs. But what do they do instead? They stand up and they follow Jesus. Now, this is just a simple line, but it's important that we see what happens. Not only did Jesus heal them physically, meaning they regained their sight, but Jesus also healed them spiritually. Can you imagine how incredible it would have been to be one of these blind men? They were blind, but they regained their sight, and the first thing they laid their eyes on was Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world. Of course, many people saw Jesus and did not believe in him, but these men had been healed not only physically, but also spiritually. They regained their physical sight. They could see the physical world around them, but they also regained their spiritual sight. They could see what was truly good and what was truly from God. So they could recognize Jesus for who he was. And with that knowledge, there was no other choice to make than to stand up and follow him. So through this simple miracle, one of many in the gospel, we see how important faith is to being healed by Jesus Christ, and that Jesus heals us not only spiritually, but also physically. And so, Sprouts, my challenge for you this day is to take serious that Jesus can heal us, that he can perform miracles even now from heaven. I want you to think of the person in your life that is ill. Maybe they are spiritually ill or physically ill. And I want you to earnestly pray for this person's healing this day. Remember that Jesus is a miracle worker, that he is a healer, and entrust this person's healing into the hands of Jesus Christ. Think of this person's name and say an earnest prayer for them in your heart. That's it for Catholic Sprouts today. We'll be back tomorrow, but until then, continue to grow in your faith and truly sprout into the beautiful creation that God intended you to be. Just one more thing, Sprouts. I need your help. Following Easter, we are going to be having a special series here on the Catholic Sprouts podcast where we talk directly to people that have made the choice to enter religious life, specifically those that serve our church as priests or those that have become nuns. So, what I need from you are questions. If you could ask a priest or a nun anything, what would you ask them? Talk to your adult and have them submit your questions that I will use to talk to priests and nuns and share with you here on the podcast. So submit them at catholicsprouts.com/questions.